Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. I will simply be sharing a story with you. Some of you have heard this story before, but that's okay because pizza tastes good a second and third time. I just want to dive right into the story. Before going to Thailand and Costa Rica and Venezuela doing missionary work, reaching out to the Buddhist people, I did not grow up a Christian and I did not read from the Bible. My last memory of going to school, I was in high school and I was causing so much trouble in class, the teacher was so upset, she went over to the wall, picked up the phone and called, guess who? She called the police. The police came into the classroom and took me away. And by that time, I had been kicked out of every school that I went to. That was the last school that I got kicked out of. And I was in a lot of trouble because as I was growing up, I looked around in the world and I saw something very simple. You will all die. I will die. We will all die. And I thought, because we will die, there's no reason for life. There's no purpose. There's nothing. Walang pag-asa. And I started to use drugs, and I started to drink, and I got involved in all sorts of crimes. And I realized, not only did I see older people dying, but my older brother at the age of 9 died from sickness. And my younger brother at the age of 13 died from suicide. And I thought, you can die when you're young, and you don't even know when you're going to die. And so I thought, you know, if we only live this life one time, we should live it for something 100%. So I decided, because I'm always in trouble, I'm going to be as bad as I possibly can be. I want to be 100% evil. And I started to commit so many crimes. And I'll just tell you one story so that you have an illustration in your mind. In 1995, at the age of 16, one night I was driving a car. And in my car were 3 men with guns. We drove up to a store. They went into the store and robbed the store. Hold up. They came out of the store, jumped in my car and said, go, go, go. So I drove down the road as fast as I could. We came to a second store. They went into the store and they were robbing that store as well. I was sitting in the car waiting for them and they were taking a long time. And then all of a sudden I heard, wah, 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 wah. That's the alarm. So the men came running out of the store, jumped in my car and said, go, 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 hurry. So I pushed on the gas, drove as fast as I could, driving down the freeway, and there in the distance I could see red and blue lights. Guess who's coming? Again, it's the police. The police come closer and closer to my car. As they're approaching, the men in my car get their guns. They are going to shoot the police. Why? Walang pag-asa. It doesn't matter. The police come closer and closer, and then all of a sudden, the police drive by my car. They're looking for the 3 men. They don't know the 3 men are in my car. So we kept on driving. I got an idea. I told the men in my car, I have a great idea. They said, what? I said, let's go rob a 3rd store, another store. They said, are you crazy? I said, no, the police just went that way. We can go that way and rob another store. And so we did, and I went home that night. I was 16 years old, and we were doing this 3-4 times every week. Why? Walang pag-asa. There's no hope. So we got this idea. Let's go rob some drug dealers because they have the drugs, the guns, and the money. So we went out. We got this plan. We thought, what is the only night of the year that in North America people will open their door at night to a stranger with a mask on? Halloween. So Halloween night, we went out and robbed these drug dealers. On our way back home, we got arrested by the police, and I was taken to the jail. The next morning, I woke up. The guards brought me into the courtroom, and I was sitting in the front of the courtroom, and I was wearing that orange prisoner suit. And I had chains on my waist, chains on my ankles. I was only 16, and I was chained to the other prisoners. The judge looked at me. He began reading off the charges to the other prisoners. And then he looked at me. He said, Andrew Michell, I know you are only 16, but if you want to commit crimes like an adult, we will treat you like an adult. I'm charging you with kidnapping in the 1st degree, count 1. Kidnapping in the first degree, count 2. Kidnapping, and he continued to read these charges often. In the room, it sounded like this. It was silent. Everyone was looking at this 16-year-old kid. As he finished reading the charges, the prisoner next to me turned and said, he said, "Do you know how serious that is?" I said, "No." He said, "First-degree murder is the most serious crime that you can commit. Next to murder is kidnapping. With 2 kidnappings, you can go to prison for 50 years. You just got charged in the Superior Court with 7 kidnappings and armed robberies in the first degree. Do you know what that means? You will go to the prison and you will die in the prison. You will never be free." I didn't know that the decisions that we make when we are young can change our entire life. The decisions you make today and in your youth will change your entire life and even your eternity. But I didn't know that. Because I was so young, they brought me into part of the prison, in the lower part of the jail, called solitary confinement. Or some prisoners call it the hole. I believe you're familiar with the term, the Bartolina. Okay, so they put me into the Bartolina, and there I was in this little tiny room, not much bigger than this little area here, and there I was all day long, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and all I could think of is my life is over. This is where it ends. It's done. A few days later, a prisoner walked by my cell. He looked in the window and said, "Hey, young man, do you want something to read?" I said, "Sure." So he opened the tray door, he slid a book into me. Can anyone here guess what book he gave to me? It was the Bible, and I thought, the Bible, the Bible. Oh yeah, years ago a teacher in school had showed a movie called The 10 Commandments. But I was so high on drugs and drinking so much, my mind was a fog, and I couldn't remember where it was. And so I yelled to the prisoner in the crack between the door and the wall. I said, "Hey, that Bible you gave me, does it have the 10 Commandments? Where are they?" And he yelled back, "I don't know. I think they're in the front." So I didn't know what to do. I just took the Bible and I just opened it random. Now, can you guess the first thing that I read in the Bible? I opened it to Proverbs chapter 1. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to summarize what I read. In Proverbs chapter 1, counsel is being given to young people. In fact, I believe it says in the Tagalog version, in verse 8 and verse 10, "Anak ako," or "Akong anak," my son, young people. It says to young people, if someone asks you to do something wrong, don't do it. If they ask you to go out to commit crime like stealing and robbing and hurting other people, don't do it, because it's going to destroy your life. So the first thing I read in the Bible is, don't do what you just did. And as you can imagine, I began to have this sense of guilt and this sense of condemnation. I felt terrible. All my crimes came back to me. I could remember all the people that I had hurt. I remember looking at the face of my mother and father and yelling at my mother and father, "I hate you so much, and if I could kill you, I would kill you." And I began to cry as I read from the Bible, but I continued to read from the Bible, and one day I flipped through and I came to this book of Matthew, and I thought the book was about Matthew. And for the first time in my life, in a jail cell, I was reading about Jesus. It was the first time I ever heard these stories. There was one story in particular that got my attention that was very inspiring, and that was in Matthew chapter 19. It's the story of the rich young ruler. Again, another story of a young person. And this rich young man runs up to Jesus and he says, "Jesus, I want to follow you." And he tells Jesus, Jesus says, "If you want to follow me, you have to give 100%. He said, "Oh, I've done everything. I've been following all these commandments. I've been doing this. I've been doing it all." In the young person's mind, he believes he's following Jesus 100%. But Jesus knows that's not true. He says, "No, there's one area of your life you need to surrender." And for him, it was his riches. For you, it may be something else. He says, "You need to surrender that." And you've read the story. What happens? Now, mathematically, it's so easy to go from 99 to 100. And he won't take that last step. Instead, he turns away and walks away from Jesus. And I thought, what in the world? Why would someone do something like this? And then I read a few verses later, because the disciples are also amazed. In verse 25, they ask Jesus, who can be saved and who can be saved? Jesus responds in verse 26. He said, with God, these things are impossible. But with men, these things are impossible. But with God, all things are possible. Maaaring mangyari. Is that right? All things are possible. And I thought, maybe all things are possible. If God can work and change all these lives of people in the Bible, maybe God can change my life as well. I didn't know how to pray, but I read in this book right here that when people would pray, God would change their life. And so I knelt on the prison floor and I prayed. I said, God, my life is ruined. I'm going to die in the prison. Please change my life. And the moment I prayed, my entire life began to change. I did not want to be 100% evil anymore. I was reading stories about Daniel and Enoch and Isaiah and Jeremiah and all these people who committed their lives 100% for God. And I decided not 100% evil, not halfway, 100% for God, whether in prison or out of prison. And I loved prayer, because the more I was reading the Bible and the more that I was praying, it was changing me. I'm a criminal by nature. I'm a sinner by nature. And it is reading from this book, it began to change my life. And as I was reading, I loved to pray. And one of my prayers was the prayers all prisoners pray. God, please save me from this situation. Please don't let me go to prison. A few months later, I walked into the courtroom and the judge looked at me. He said, I'm going to give you the shortest sentence I can give you. I'm sending you to the adult prison for 13 years. Because I was so young, they took me to the adult prison, kept me in the Bartolina, and there I was for 2 years. I stayed in that little space. I did not leave for 2 years. The best 2 years of my life. Number one, I had undistracted time reading from the Bible, from front to back, many times, knowing the story for myself. Number two, I was so convicted as I read from the Bible that the most valuable gift God had given me was a brain, and I should use it. And I realized, even in the Bartolina, I have a brain. Is there anyone else here today that you have a brain as well? Am I alone? Do you have a brain? Raise your hand. Praise the Lord. Praise God. I prayed, God, how can I use my brain? A teacher came down to my cell. He said, because you're a juvenile in an adult prison, we're going to let you, if you want, to complete your high school diploma. I said, yes. 10 months later, the teacher said this. He said, I went to Andrew's cell. I gave him the books and homework. The next day, he gave it all back to me. I thought he didn't want to go to school, but I looked and it was all completed. So every day I gave all the schoolwork back. There was no Facebook, no internet, no girlfriends, no cell phone, nowhere to go, nothing to do but homework all day long. So I finished 3 years of high school in only 10 months with 3.7 GPA. Here's the lesson. Because I was faithful with the small opportunity, God gave me more. It's a very important principle. The prison said, because you're going to school and getting good grades, staying out of trouble, we're going to give you a radio. So they gave me a Walkman radio. I would put it up into the window of my cell. I tuned in. I found a radio station, and I was listening for the first time in my life. It was a Christian radio station, to sermons and songs. It was so wonderful to hear these things, to learn that other people were talking about the Bible. It was so wonderful. Every Sunday night, my favorite program would come on, Bible Answers Live with Doug Batchelor, Amazing Facts. It was a Seventh-day Adventist radio station. I don't know who Adventists were. I didn't know anything about them, but they knew that Bible. They loved that Bible. They were talking about the importance of honoring God with the decisions that we make and obeying Him because He has saved us, because we love Him, and that Jesus will come back someday, and we have the wonderful privilege of sharing this good news with the entire world. And I wanted to be a part of that, and I thought one day when I get out of jail, I want to meet an Adventist. Well, as time went by, my mother and father came to the prison to visit me. And I remember that day the guards, they chained me up and they shuffled me down to that little visit room. And it was a little cell with a steel table and a bulletproof glass window. There was a phone there, and I was talking to my mother and father. Maybe you've seen this on the news or in the movies. Okay, everyone's nodding yes. I look at my father and I look at my mother. For the first time in my life, I said, Mom, I love you. I look at my father, I said, Dad, I love you. I never said that to my parents ever. And it was not until I lost everything that I had, that's when I realized the value of the blessings that God has given to us. If you have not said, I love you to your mother and father for a long time, please do that today. Do not put it off. You may not get a second chance. If you have a tension with your parents, find peace with them at whatever cost. Spend time finding peace with your parents. You will not get this opportunity forever. And as my parents they began to cry, and I picked up the phone, and my dad picked up the phone. He said, son, we are so glad your life is changing so much. You're like a brand new son. And my mother sent me a newer Bible that was easier to read. And I mean, so God not only changed my life, but my parents as well. And not only did reading the Bible change my life and my parents, but it had an effect on the people around me, which it naturally should. And I yelled out to the prisoners next to me, and I said, hey, do you guys want to study the Bible with me? It's helping me so much. And some of the prisoners yelled back to me, no, we don't. But they said, there's another prisoner on the upper floor. He's on the second floor. He's also studying the Bible. But you can't talk to him because he's on the floor and you're separated. He said, but prisoners think of ways to get around the rules. That's all they do all day long. They said, there's a secret way to communicate with the prisoner upstairs. And they told me the secret way. Do you want me to share with you the secret way? Okay. You're going to need to use your brain and use your imagination. They said, walk over to your bed and get that little plastic pillow. Take your pillow, walk over and put it on the toilet seat on the inodoro. Now, you're going to press the pillow down and you're going to make a seal. You're going to push up and down on the pillow. The pillow's going to push the air is going to push the water, and the water is going to go out of the toilet. Okay? So I climb up onto the sink. I bang 4 times on the ceiling. He knows what that means. Secret code. He pumps the water out of his toilet. If you had walked by my cell at that moment, you would see me kneeling on the ground with my face in the toilet. And I yelled. I said, hey, can you hear me? I'm studying the Bible. Can we study the Bible together? And I listened. And I heard, yes, I'm studying the Bible. So God gave me a Bible study in the Bartolina. Isn't that a wonderful toilet testimony? My question to you is, would you be willing? Jesus had to endure infinite humiliation to come down to share this good news with us. Would you be willing to put your face in the toilet to share the gospel if you knew that the other person would listen to you and accept that good news? Would you be willing to do that? Second question, if you had to humiliate yourself and put your face in a toilet to share the gospel, but you knew that they would listen to you and reject it, they would not accept it, would you still give the Bible study? Jesus would. Jesus did. That's how wonderful this good news is. He came down here whether we wanted it or not, and I am so glad he did that. At the age of 18 years old, on my birthday, I was transferred to the adult prison. When I got to the adult prison, my mind was so focused from 2 years in solitary, I started to go to school and again, take advantage of the small opportunities that God had given me. Year after year after year, many years went by. From time to time, the older prisoners would come up and talk to me, and they would say, hey, Mitchell. Now, my last name is Michelle, like the name of a girl. But some people mispronounce it and say Mitchell. When I was in prison, I did not correct anyone because I didn't want to be in prison for 13 years being called Michelle. Sometimes we should be wise and avoid unnecessary troubles. They said, Mitchell, is it true that you came to the prison when you were only 16? I said, yes. They said, is it true you were in the Bartolina for 2 years? I said, yes. They said, you know, you don't act like any of the other prisoners. From 7 in the morning till 9 at night, all you do is go to school all day long and study, go to church, and you're reading the Bible. Sometimes we walk by your cell at 4 in the morning, and you're kneeling on the ground. Why are you doing that? And they said, you know, all the other prisoners gamble. You don't gamble. All the other prisoners use drugs. You don't use drugs. All the other prisoners have tattoos. You've been in prison now 8, 9 years. You don't even have one tattoo. They said, why don't you act like the other prisoners? Why is your life so different? I said, every morning, this is all I do. I pick up this book. I open it. And I read from it. And then I pray about what I read. It's that simple. That's all that I do. And it's that's changing my life. So simple. So effective. I mean, that's what's happening in my life. As time went by, a prisoner one day when I was studying some law books, he said, Andrew, you should apply for what's called a pardon. And I thought, a pardon? I never heard of that before. And he said, you should apply because your life is so different. Well, the summary of the situation, he said, Andrew, what prisoners do, it's very rare, it almost never happens, but you should try. You fill out this paperwork, you send it to the government, and there's a board of 5 judges. They hear your petition. And if there's a majority vote out of 5, which is how many? 3. If they approve, it goes to the governor for his signature, and you will get a pardon. But in prison, this never happens. No one ever talks about it. But as I was reading the Bible every morning, I was so convicted that God wanted me to apply, to take advantage of the small opportunities. So I submitted the paperwork. I sent it to the government. It was petitioned before the 5 judges. It was recorded online in video and audio. You can see it for yourself. The 5 judges hear my petition, and it's unlike all the other petitions. This guy came to prison when he was 16. He spent 2 years in solitary. He's been giving his money to charity and helping other people. He's been teaching the other prisoners. He's taken all these college-level classes. He has not wasted any of his time. It was a really amazing story, and then it came down to a vote. They said, all those in favor of giving a pardon to Andrew Michell, say aye. Can you guess how many people voted out of 5? Only 2. I lost by 1 vote. Now I want to ask you a question. Am I alone? Am I alone? Or are there other people in here that maybe you've prayed for something for a long period of time, over and over, but God did not answer you the way you wanted him to do it, when you wanted him to do it? Am I alone, or are there other people? Yes, I see people, almost everyone's head nodding, yes. And so, but I thought to myself, when I heard that news that I had lost, I was both glad and I was sad. I was glad because I thought, I got 2 votes. No one ever gets any votes, but I got 2, and I was so glad. But then I was so sad because I thought, what happened? I thought God was going to do a miracle. But I decided, you know what? Even if God doesn't answer my prayer the way I want him to, Meron akong pagasa. Jesus will one day raise me from the dead. And that's enough for me. And I read that and I thought, I'm going to be faithful to God no matter what happens in my life. So I continued to take advantage of the opportunities, thinking God will let me out of prison whenever he wants to. Well, as time went by, I continued to go to school. January 11th, 2005, I was in the prison in Washington State in McNeil Island. I was on the 4th floor in cell 405. And it was in the afternoon, and the guards came running up to the cell, and they banged on the door. They said, Prisoner Mitchell, they said, you need to go to the administration building right now, which is always bad news. And I thought, what did I do wrong? The prisoners in my cell, they were smoking cigarettes and watching TV. And one of them said to me, he said, Andrew, what did you do wrong? You don't even drink coffee. I thought, I don't know. I had learned in prison the importance of being healthy, because when we are healthier, we serve better. Does that make sense? It's really, really simple. And so I thought, I need to go to the administration. I went down, I opened the door, I walked in. There were the police and the director of the prison. He ran up to me, put his finger in my face, and this is what he said word for word. Are you Andrew Michell? Yes. We don't know who you are, and we don't know who you know. But we just received an order from Governor Gary Locke's office to release you immediately. He said, I have been working in this prison for years, and this has never happened to anyone. Go back to your cell right now because you're being released. January 11th, 2005 was the last day in office for Governor Gary Locke of Washington State. He later became the ambassador for the U.S. to China. For reasons unknown today how this happened, somehow he heard this story of how God had changed someone's life so much in prison that he was contributing and helping other people. He overturned the board's decision and set me free. When I was released from the prison, I remember I was so happy. I prayed, God, thank you for bringing me out of this prison. Please help me. You've brought me through 10 years in prison. Help me to remain faithful all these years that I am now free. And I remember one day I thought, those Adventists, I want to find an Adventist. I found this Adventist church. It was my first Sabbath. I even called the pastor and asked for permission. Can I attend your church? Because prisoners have to ask for permission. I opened the door. I stepped in. It was my first Sabbath. I remember standing there thinking, wow, I'm in God's church on God's day with God's people reading from God's book. And I thought, this is so wonderful. But as time went by, I asked a question to my pastor, what is God's will for my life? What does God want me to do? And I know that's a question that a lot of you ask. I asked my pastor, what is God's will for my life? He said, Andrew, I don't know what God's specific will is for your life, but it is always God's will to do missions. You cannot go wrong getting involved in missions. He opened to Matthew 24:14. He said, Andrew, this good news that has changed your life must go to the whole world. He said, Andrew, there are areas in the world, there are Hindus, there are Buddhists, and there are Muslims, and there are no Christians living among them. There's nothing. If they want to know the truth, there's no one to share with them. Andrew, you have to go. And I thought, how can I go? I'm a high school dropout, drug addict felon. How can God give an opportunity to me? But I had learned in prison, take advantage of the small opportunities. So I started feeding the homeless in my community. That turned into a short-term invitation to a mission trip in Mexico for several weeks. That turned into an invitation to go to Venezuela to outreach to youth for several months. I was invited to Costa Rica to be a teacher of Bible classes and English classes in Costa Rica. And then after 6 months, I was invited to Thailand for 6 months working with the Buddhist people. At the end of 6 months, the Buddhists, even some of the Buddhists in my community came up to me and said, Andrew, where are you going after 6 months? I said, I don't know. I'll probably go back home. They said, you cannot leave. The girls at the orphanage love you. They call you their father. The prisoners want you to keep visiting. The kids at the refugee camp don't want you to leave. Please stay here. 6 months turned into 5 years. And then Jem invited me to the Philippines. But as time went by, I want to be honest with you, and I want to be transparent. You have heard stories of people that go to prison, get out of prison, and then they do something they just do something really stupid. They go back to prison. And I need to tell you that when I got out of prison, it was not easy. There were many challenges. Learning how to be normal, learning how to adjust was so difficult. And I made some decisions, and those decisions made me go back to prison. Can you guess why? One day I got a phone call. They said, we are the university that sponsored all the programs at your prison. And you were the prisoner that took all of our classes and then took some of them over and over again just to stay in school. They said, we heard what your life is like working in the orphanage, helping prisoners, doing all this work with the refugee camp. Will you come back to the prison and be our guest speaker at the graduation for the other prisoners? I said, praise God. When God brings you out of a prison, out of a difficult circumstance, when you realize how much God loves you and that He loves the other people who are still in those circumstances, when you love Jesus, you will go back and share with them because you want them to have the same experience that you are having. So yes, I did go back to prison, and I've had the opportunity to go to prisons all over the world. I love going to prisons. It's such a wonderful opportunity to share with people. And finally, I want to share the final story. A few years ago, I was at my mother's house. My father passed away when I was in prison. He never lived to see me free. He never lived to see his son go to prison for kidnapping and armed robbery and do all this mission work and helping kids in the orphanage in different countries. And when I was going through the paperwork, cleaning through the house, I opened a folder and this letter fell out. I'm sorry, I don't have the picture right now. This letter fell out of the folder onto the ground. I reached down, I picked up the letter, and I read it. And it was a letter from my father to my mother. I went to prison in 1995. I was released almost 10 years later in 2005. The letter was dated, I think, 2001 or 2002. It was a letter from my father to my mother, and this is what it said. He said, I am so proud of what my son has been doing with his life, even in the prison. He says, I know that I no longer need to be ashamed of my actions or his. Love you. And then he wrote his name. It was a letter from my father to my mother. My mom said she never saw it. I have the actual physical letter. For some reason, my dad didn't send that. My father had gone to jails. My father had gone to police stations. No one in the community liked my father or my family because of what his son had been doing. But my life had been changed so much that my father said, I'm not ashamed to be his father anymore. It says in the Bible that the Father in heaven was so pleased by the witness and the life of Jesus Christ. He need not be ashamed. I want God in heaven not to be ashamed of my witness, and I don't want to be ashamed of my Father. I want to ask you a question. Do you want to have a witness that is so clear, so transparent with Jesus that God need not be ashamed, but he has pleasure in your witness? Do you want that?